Good afternoon, everybody from Glasgow. I'd like to introduce you to the Nordic Pavilion and our event today, where I'm going to introduce you to Future Climate Engineering Solutions. This is a group of engineers and engineering organisations who work together to produce national energy plans, share good practice, and support the ambition to reduce dependence on fossil fuels and meet the targets set out in the 2015 Paris Agreement. So today I'm joined. So my name's Alana Collis. I work for the Institution of Chemical Engineers, the Learning Society and Policy Manager, and I'm also co-chair of Future Climate Engineering Solutions. I'm joined by Jonathan Simons, the Managing Director of the Products Division of Combustion in the UK, and he's been our lead author on our UK energy plan. Also Kurt Emil Eriksson, Senior Political Advisor to the Velux Group, and he's also a board member of EDA, the Danish Society of Engineers, and he's been instrumental in work on the Danish activity in recent years. And online from Geneva, we are joined by Beatrice Fernandez, who's also the other co-chair of Future Climate Engineering Solutions, and in her day job, she's an Associate Program Management Officer at the United Nations Environment Programme. So welcome all of you, thank you for joining me today, and thanks to everyone who's joined us online. So I'm going to hand over to Beatrice to start off with, who's going to introduce you to Future Climate Engineering Solutions and the work that it's been developing over the last few years. Beatrice, over to you.
Thank you, Alana. And I'd like to start by thanking the Nordic Pavilion for the opportunity to have this event at COP26. And thank you everyone who's joining us in Glasgow and also online and giving us your time in this event. And I'd like to start by saying, why is it relevant that you're joining today in this discussion? You have probably followed COP26. There's so many talks, and there are other organizations doing the proverbial and inspirational part, which is very, very important as well. But today, I invite you to be engaged in this discussion, because Future Climate Engineering Solutions is about action. And we are a global alliance of professional engineering associations around the world. We've been in the climate change agenda for over 10 years, and we are engineers in our voluntary capacity working in this project. And what we do is we develop science-based and data-driven energy and climate plans, which means we use data and science and translate it into clear pathways that can help governments and policymakers achieve their NDCs. These national energy and climate plans are aligned to the IPCC's scenario of the need to stay below 2 degrees Celsius in temperature increase, and also to promote renewable energies and to move away from fossil fuels, which allow us to transition to an economy that is carbon neutral. So we are about creating action. We are about translating science and data into clear roadmaps. If you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And here I'm just giving you again an overview of who we are and how do we fit in the global climate change agenda. As we know, SDG 13 is pursuing action to tackle climate change and its impact. And we have a very clear mandate from the IPCC on the need to keep the temperature increase below 2 degrees Celsius. And now we are striving to even push it for 1.5 degrees, which is proving challenging for the world. But here what we do with Future Climate Engineering Solutions, and as I've been saying, is to use science and data and to produce roadmaps that are clear for governments on how to deliver on their NDCs. The Danish Society of Engineers is a founding member of the Future Climate Engineering Solutions. We've been involved with different countries like the UK, and today in this event you will also hear about John leading the UK Energy and Climate Plan. And how do we produce these energy and climate plans? We have a framework that has been peer-reviewed, and it's going on its 4th iteration so far. And it's a framework that allows us to have consistency in how the energy plans are developed for different countries. And they have a set of guidelines and best practices on how these energy and climate plans should be developed. If you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And here I'm just elaborating more on the energy and on the framework that I was talking about. This is a framework that allows us to have national plans that are based on sound engineering expertise, that engage the right stakeholders from the start, and that set clear but realistic milestones for the implementation throughout different targets. And we've had this framework as the backbone of our work. Of course, we have developed energy and climate plans, as I said, for Denmark and the UK and India and other countries. But we also provide this framework as an opportunity for other engineering associations who want to build their capacity and want to engage in developing energy and climate plans for their governments. Next slide, please. Okay, I think with that, I just wanted to wrap up. Future Climate Engineering Solutions, we've been around in the climate change agenda for a long time, since COP15 in Denmark, and we've been making a strong case on why engineers play a crucial role, that through our skills or knowledge or capacity, we can develop science and data-driven energy and climate plans that can help governments and policymakers achieve their NDCs. And with that, I hand over to you, Alana. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice, for that quick run through. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jonathan Simons, who's led some work on the not quite finished UK energy plan.
Thank you.
He'll explain it. Thank you, John.
Checking whether my earpiece. Can you see my microphone? Is it there, right? It's there. Brilliant. Thank you. Oops. Shall I do that?
If you want.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm John Simons. First of all, I'd like to thank my co-authors, John Nichols, Graham Sutcliffe and David Wickham. I'd also very much like to thank Alana for moderating the discussions we've had in our Teams meetings over the last 18 months and for editing the final document. So the document is currently at the editing stage. It's also going for peer review before publication, and I encourage you to check the FCES website for the final version when it comes out. So you've just seen an introduction to FCES from Beatrice and how we produce frameworks for producing national energy plans. So we followed that in producing this, this energy plan for the UK. Just as an example from that, the framework suggests that you use an energy hierarchy. So you minimize demand for energy, and then you increase energy efficiency and consider energy conversion technologies. You source energy from sustainable renewable sources, and having then maximized the above points, you use other energy supplies with associated technologies that minimize greenhouse gas emissions. So in that spirit of tackling the big things first, on the right you can see the UK's greenhouse emissions in 2019, and we've ranked them from the biggest hitters first down to the smallest emitters. So we have heat at the top, followed by transport, followed by energy supply. Now those three things together are our energy emissions, and as this is an energy plan, those are the things we've concentrated on most. Below that you have process emissions, which are things which fundamentally give out CO2 as part of their chemistry or biology. For example, cement production in the making of concrete, or farming. We also produce engineering solutions for those process emissions as well in our report. So this is the plan in the form of a Sankey diagram. So we start on the left from the energy usage we have today. In the middle we have 2035, which is the UK government's interim target date where they want to get to 78%. And on the right is 2050, where the UK government intend getting to net zero. It is, above all else, a tale of electrification. Getting the other energy sources into some form of electricity. There may be intermediate fuels such as hydrogen, but fundamentally this is about electricity generation. So on the left we have surface transport, essentially petrol and diesel. So those figures are derived from the sales of petrol and diesel in the UK. Then we have gas, heating in other words. We have the current electricity demands, and at the top the elephant in the room perhaps, is air transport. Now the UK government doesn't currently count all air fuel used in the UK as part of our emissions. It only counts the domestic flights. The UK is a massive international air hub, and that red bar, that 18 gigawatts a year, 18 gigawatts, sorry, continuous output, represents the total air fuel consumed in the UK, of which the domestic amount is just a small amount. We carry that through, and we have to assume by 2050 we can be using sustainable air fuel for that. So let's go to 2035. So we assume in this plan that by 2035 we can convert half of the heating by gas into electric heat pumps. Now those come with an efficiency factor of 300%. In other words, every kilowatt of power you put into them, you get 3 kilowatts of heat out, approximately. So on the Sankey diagram, you can see that large blue band gets converted into a thinner green band of electricity. So for vehicles, even though there is still some room to improve engine emissions, the UK government has imposed a ban on petrol and diesel cars by 2030. So we are making the assumption here by 2035, perhaps half the fleet of those petrol and diesel cars will be converted to be electric vehicles. And again, we have roughly a factor of 3 in efficiency gain there from the internal combustion engine over to electric vehicles. So again, that translates into a somewhat more narrow green band on the electricity diagram. Everything else we carry through. So we've converted half the heating and half the cars. So if we then go to 2035 to 2050, with buildings and heating, we assume that we'll have some better insulation by then. So there's a small bar there for better insulation. Bear in mind, a lot of UK residential properties are very old. It's a big problem in the UK. We don't have that new housing stock that maybe other countries do. The rest of the gas we then convert to heat pumps. We then convert the rest of the cars and the vans to electric vehicles. The heavy goods vehicles, in this particular plan, we're assuming will be powered by hydrogen. We think we need to keep the hydrogen for the things that really need it, where batteries are really inconvenient due to their weight in the case of HGVs. We also have some other hydrogen for industrial purposes and for some grid storage. What this diagram shows that by 2050 we'll have essentially more than doubled our electricity demand. So, with the figures shown so far, these are all averages, and many energy plans show the average terawatt hours required in a year, or the average gigawatt generation required at any one time. If you're dealing with variable renewables, as we certainly are and will be in the UK, that's not quite good enough. So on the left-hand side, the orange waveform, as you can see, represents what we think the electricity demand will be over 10 years from 2050. It's the sum of the current electricity we use in the UK, the current fuel we use in the UK, and the current gas we use in the UK, assuming we make those efficiency savings with electric vehicles and with heat pumps. As you can see, it varies over a year, and that's because we need more heating in the winter and less in the summer. Superimposed on that in blue, you can see the UK wind capacity factor, which is the amount we've generated, divided by the installed capacity over the previous decade. Now, of course, a lot's changed at that time. When we started that, we were mostly onshore wind. We're now a mixture of roughly 50-50 onshore and offshore wind. The good news is the peaks and troughs in the demand and the wind generation grossly line up when you step back. You get more wind in the winter, you need more heat in the winter. However, if you zoom in, there are problems. And yes, we will build more wind capacity. It will have increased capacity factors up to 50%. We'll build them further out at sea, but as we found out recently, the British territorial waters are only so big. You can see you've got a scenario there if you zoom in just in 2020 where there was roughly 20 days where the UK wind generation was 20% or less of its full capacity. That could be a problem. It's clear to us that we do need storage associated with that wind, and for every megawatt that you calculate the price of generating by wind, you also need to calculate the right number of megawatt hours to store it, which is not currently done. Indeed, the cost of that storage is, as of yet, unknown in many cases. But I think it's clear that we also need an increased amount of firm power than what the government is currently committed to. So this is our suggestion for the electricity source mix from 2020 through to 2050. Yes, there's quite a lot more wind, but there's also quite a lot more nuclear power, which is carbon-free firm power. And we're really talking maybe 7 or 8 more nuclear power stations. Given our current nuclear capacity is dwindling in about 5-7 years, it'll pretty much have gone away to virtually nothing. There is some interconnect in there. We might want to consider giving geopolitical situations whether we want to rely so much on the interconnect, but that simply means we need more firm power. So on the right, you can see the backup source mix, which is there when the variable renewables are not working so well. So some of that is storage through hydrogen and pumped storage, so when there's excess renewables. We're starting off by using the combined cycle gas turbine plants we have to provide that backup. We're gradually switching those over to use carbon capture and storage by the time we get to 2050, as that technology matures. Question is, do the lights stay on? Well, I think they will. You can see the demand there as the waveform. You can also see the predicted supply, assuming the last 10 years are representative of the wind in the UK. That's scaled up. The government in the sixth carbon budget think that in the future there'll be up to 50% average wind capacity factor in the UK. That's scaled up to reflect what they think will happen there. Below that in green you can see the surplus or deficit. So we have a surplus in the summer, a deficit in the winter. But the important thing is the amount of backup we put in there, which is the red line, is enough to make sure the lights stay on. Finally, the most important thing is, do we meet net zero? So we have 2019 through to 2050. We have the emissions from our energy plan. We also have some process emissions in there. So by 2035, this plan actually gets you down to 70% of the 1990 levels. The government's target is 78. We think, given we're 14 years away, that really is very ambitious. The important thing, however, is by 2050, we do get down to pretty much net zero. So in that way, we hope it's a plan that will be considered. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's certainly a challenge, but one that certainly engineers are going to help. So Kurt, if I can hand over to you to talk about how you've worked on and how you've got to the Danish energy plan.
Thank you. It was very interesting to see the previous presentation because I think there's a clear link to what we have done in the Danish Engineering Association as well. I would like to start talking about how we have worked in the Danish Engineering Association. We have worked in the following way: that we have asked experts within each different areas, for instance, within building, within energy supply, within transport, and so on, to come up with inputs to the Engineering Association about what can we do in the different areas. And I have been so lucky that I have been working with that as an expert on buildings. And then we have had the University of Aalborg and a couple of professors from there to go through all the ideas that we had and discuss them with us. And then they have made a calculation on how the Danish energy system could look like. So what we have done is we have merged the knowledge that we have at the universities with the knowledge that we have in the Engineering Association among our members who are working on their daily work in different companies. So it is a bottom-up process, I would say, that we have worked with. Yes. What we have identified, I think I would start somewhere else. In Denmark, we have put up an ambition that we shall reduce the CO2 emission with 70% in 2030 compared to 1990. That is a huge figure, and that is really an ambition that the government have set here. And we have tried to work with solutions that could bring us to those 70% reduction by 2030, and therefore we have 2030 as our medium target in the way that we are working, and that is what I'm showing on the screen right now. So in 1990 we have had around 77 million tons of CO2 equivalents per year, and that will be around 22 when we come to 2030 if we follow the strategy that the Engineering Association has recommended. What you can see here is that there is a lot of energy saving in our plan. We have a huge amount of energy saving in the structure that we are working with. We reduce the energy demand dramatically in buildings and industries. And then when we look at that, we can see on the slides at the right side how we use the energy then. And that is per sector. So you can see that we still have a lot of energy or CO2 emissions from the transport sector in 2020, and we will reduce that to 77.8 million tons of CO2 in 2030. We cannot reduce it more at that short time, but when we come to 2050, and I will show that later, it is 100% carbon neutral. Then we have, between now and 2030, a huge saving in heat of buildings and in the industry. And that is energy efficiency that we are working with now. The Engineering Association recommend that we reduce the energy demand in buildings with 12% between now and 2030. And then between 2030 and 2045, we reduce with further 35%, as I recall. So again, it is about saving the energy, which we are talking about in Denmark, and then integrating renewable energy. If we look at the way the energy system is today, how the energy system will look in 2030, and how the energy system will look in 2045 when we are 100% carbon neutral, then you can see on the left part that we have a lot of fossil fuel going into the system today. And that fossil fuel is mainly used in industries and transport. Then we have a lot of biogas, that's the green bar. We have a lot of biogas going into the system as well, and that is used for domestic heating. And then we have electricity, renewable, we have windmills, a certain amount of windmill and solar going into the system as well. And that is used for the electricity demand that we have. And when you look at 2030, you can see the blue bar has grown dramatically. That is a lot of renewable energy, that is a lot of wind energy that we have integrated into the system. And we have also grown the green one, which is solar, that we get into the system. So we will grow, we will reduce the demand, and we will grow renewable energy by wind and solar. Then we have reduced the amount of biomass that we use in 2030 compared to today. And that is because we do not believe that we should use biomass for heating of buildings. We should use it elsewhere, and I will come back to that. But that has been reduced in 2030, the amount of biomass going into the system. And then you can see that we have also reduced the fossil fuel going into the system. And the fossil fuel that we use in the system is mainly only used in transport in 2030. When it comes to 2045, where we want to be 100% carbon neutral, you can see that fossil fuel has disappeared out of the system. And you will see that the biomass has grown in the system in 2045. And that biomass is now used in the transport sector. And that is why we want to decouple the building sector or the heating sector from biomass. It is because we want to use the biomass in the transport sector instead of heating of the buildings. And when it comes to buildings, we want to make them energy efficient and then deliver renewable energy to them. And that is an easy thing to say. It's a challenge to do. I think I will end with those words because I think we come back to economy and labor thing and later on. So I will keep it. I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Kurt. And for those of you who, like me, don't speak Danish, their energy plan is online, but shortly there will be an English version available. I have a privileged for early copy here, but it's not on the internet yet, but it will be soon. So I think, thank you, Jonathan, thank you, Beatrice, thank you, Kurt. I'm surrounded by engineers here talking about these solutions, and it goes across the engineering space, all kinds of disciplines looking at this, so thank you. We've got time for kind of a bit of discussion on these works, because everyone's got a different solution depending on where they're from. So Beatrice, if I can come to you first, we've seen that a vital part of this is demand reduction, and then the generation has to kind of be decarbonised in its own way. Can you, engineers are part of this, can you give me a brief kind of insight into your view about how nationally determined contributions can benefit from these energy scenarios, and why should we ask engineers to be engaging in this debate, from the bottom up and also at the high level strategic areas?
Yeah, thank you, Alana, and thanks, John and Kurt, for sharing this work on the energy plans. And as I started my intervention, I said that future climate engineering solutions is about action. It's about how do we tackle climate change. And NDCs today are something that was started in Paris at the convention, at the conference in COP21, where the Paris Agreement was a big victory for the world. And it took us in that direction of having more concrete targets to align our work. And what we see here today with John leading the UK Energy Plan and Kurt for Denmark, we see that this is a concrete example on how engineers can engage and use our skills, our knowledge, science, and data to get to the NDCs commitment in a clear, but also in a pragmatic and very concrete way. As I've been saying, in this COP26, we've heard about different commitments for carbon neutrality, some countries announcing it for later, 2070, some others for 2030, and we don't have time. We don't have time. So here it's critical that we engage engineers in this space, because we're not, we are currently operating in silos. We have policymakers, we have governments, we have engineers, we have the civil society groups, and so on. But if we provide governments and policymakers with a clear pathway that allows them to achieve their NDCs through the use of science and data, engineers have a very critical role to play in climate change, in advancing the global agenda, and in meeting correctly the targets that we have set. And as Kurt was saying, achieving something is very easy to say, but it's not easy really to make it happen. And hence the urgency that we engage with governments and policymakers, and that we help them with science and data. So engineers are really well placed at the center of this climate agenda for the action, for translating these ideas into action. And we invite people that are watching this event or participating in online, in person, that they get in touch with us with Future Climate Engineering Solutions. Our website is there. Our framework is available to everyone who would like to understand better, how do I produce an energy plan for my government? And as I said, this is a peer-reviewed framework that has been going on for a long time. We are in the 4th iteration, and next year we're going to do the next review. So it allows us to have consistency across those energy plans. And there's so many opportunities for so many countries around the world to join us, that if engineers engage in this global movement to make things happen, then I think we'll be pushing for real action to deliver on climate change.
Thank you, Beatrice. Yeah, we're all agreed that action is required, but action is hard. And it's going to come at a significant cost, infrastructure, and there's an awful lot to even underpin that. So, I mean, if I can come to you, Kurt, you've been, involved in the EDA work for kind of about 15 years in doing these energy plans, and the cost of this change is significant, as you've said, but the cost of doing nothing is even greater. So, how can engineers best use their expertise to kind of inform and support this change in a way that is, manageable?
Well, we first of all, I would like to say that we use the plan in Denmark in dialogue with the government and the politicians, and I think we use it very much as an input to the NDCs. And I think I totally agree with Beatrice that we can use this work in the public affairs or in the political on the political agenda, and we should do it because we are the only one who have this overview, and the overview that we see on the screen right now is very easy to explain to people who are maybe not that deep into technologies, but are understanding the political game. And I think we should use our plans to go into the political game and then explain what is it exactly we need to do. And having said that, we have calculated the costs of this plan, and it's not cheap. It is around 500 billion Danish crowns, which is close to 80 billion euro or 19 billion dollars. So it's definitely not cheap to make this transition. But we have also looked into what are the savings, because we built our plan on energy saving, energy efficiency, renovation of the existing building stock, energy efficiency in the industries and so on. And there are a lot of savings when we do it like that. And we have estimated that the investment will be balanced with the savings. So if we do it, and if we can afford to do it, because there is an investment needed before we can take the savings. So we need to have the finance to do it. But if we can afford to do it, we will have it paid back when we come to 2045. So there are costs, but it is a cost coming in the early process of the transition. There will be a payback afterwards. And we need to do those investments. And then it's the question how to do them. But that is up to others to discuss. And here we could recommend to go together with other organizations also. Maybe there is a financial institutions like the engineering associations which we could talk to and identify solutions with. That's just an idea.
That sounds like a very good idea. Jonathan, from the UK perspective and the work you've done on the UK Energy Plan, have you got anything you'd like to add to that?
I think both those questions were really about the numbers. The numbers are so important. The numbers, whether they be the terawatt hours or the pounds or the crowns or the volume of waste produced, getting those numbers right is so important. Now, one of the things that inspired me to look into this was the book by David Mackay, which is the Sustainability Without the Hot Air, the late David Mackay, who I was privileged to know. And it's a book of back-of-the-envelope calculations on energy. And I've tried to take that very numerical approach with this, which is why I have lots of graphs, because I think numbers are terribly important, and getting those numbers right is terribly important. So, I think I mentioned during my talk, it's all very well to talk about renewables being cheaper than nuclear, but have you considered the cost of the storage using technologies that don't yet really exist, that you need to back up those renewables? It's things like that. It's really a matter of getting the numbers right, and I think engineers are good with numbers. And worrying about the big stuff first. I mean, the UK 6 carbon budget considers, the amount of recreational nitrous oxide use in the UK. It's not very big, but I think we've got bigger things to worry about than that.
Okay, thank you very much. Obviously, there needs to be a huge amount of financial investment to realise this aim for net zero and the 1.5 degrees target that is our ultimate ambition. But here in Glasgow, we've heard an awful lot about skills and the just transition. To realise these changes in energy scenarios, we are going to need skills, we're going to need more skills, we're going to need new skills. And this is something that some of us in the engineering institutions, so EDA, Danish Society of Engineers, myself at the Institution of Chemical Engineers, it's fundamental to what we do as institutions. We support the education, the training, the skills, and that continuous development of our engineers to do these. So, I mean, Kurt, coming to you again, have you been involved in the Danish side in terms of making sure that we've got those skills to support these solutions, those engineering skills? How do you think we can work those in, and do we need to quantify them in these energy plans?
Yes, I think we need to quantify them. and I think we need to quantify them for the reason that we will have to move jobs from the fossil fuel area to the renewable area, and we will have to move jobs from the fossil fuel area to the construction sector, because we are going to renovate. We're going to double the renovation rate, not only in Denmark, but globally. We need to double the renovation rate in order to reach the ambitions that we have. We need to renovate 2.5% of our building stock per year between now and 2050. And we only renovate 1% today. So we need much more people in that field. And that will be engineers, that will be architects, and that will be craftsmen. So it will be all kind of jobs we will have to look at here. And if we are not looking into those things, we risk that we create a bottleneck in the transition that we have in front of us. So we need to look at this. I don't have a solution on how the Danish Engineering Association should look at that, or some other engineering associations should. But I would recommend that we try to see future jobs in a new perspective as what it is today. We need to do things differently. We need to be educated differently in the future.
Well, certainly from the Institution of Chemical Engineers perspective, our own position statement on climate change sets out a commitment to support the profession in terms of identifying the skills that they're going to need and supporting the reskilling of engineers as, for example, the fossil fuel sector declines. I mean, I already know that there's a lot of examples of engineers who've worked maybe in offshore oil and gas industry, moving to the offshore wind sector, taking some of those skills with them. So it's about obviously having the jobs, having the skills to support those jobs, and something we're hearing a lot about here in Glasgow is the quality of the jobs and making sure that those individuals, those people with the skills, can go on that journey with us, and that then impacts on communities where some industry may decline away from that. So, I mean, Beatrice, online, from a UNEP and a personal engineering perspective, have you got anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard a lot recently on the need to move away from fossil fuels, but fossil fuels have a big subsidy. We spend more than $400 billion per year in subsidies to fossil fuels. So the change and moving away from that industry is not going to be only the economic aspect. That will be a big driver, of course. But as Kurt and you already said, Lana, is how do we also upskill and reskill all the workforce in that industry, because they have a wealth of knowledge and skills already. So how do we make sure that that is well translated into other areas and sectors that are in line with the current reality that we need to take action on climate change? So from the fossil fuel side, there's a clear direction, and there's a growing movement and call to action on that space. What I also wanted to say is that from the future climate engineering solutions, it's not only about producing energy and climate plans, but it's also about having this network to share best practices and knowledge. As we have just seen with John and Kurt, presenting two different energy plans for two different countries with different priorities, with different sectors on focus. But that allows the exchange on best practices, on knowledge, on challenges, on how to overcome them. So that's another strength that future climate engineering solutions bring to this climate agenda. The opportunity to connect with peers, with experts, with people that are involved in concretely delivering pathways. And that will permeate in different areas, from transitioning to another sector and the upskilling and reskilling, but also what Kurt was saying already, investment. So NDCs are also about how do we make climate finance and investments? How do we make that transition is not only mitigation and adaptation, because that has a cost. So we have this holistic approach that doesn't end only on the pathways, but we touch on different things. And we also start hearing more and more that climate talks are nature talks. And we have the Biodiversity Convention next year, the COP15, the second part of COP15. And we will see that climate change is intrinsically linked to nature. And nature has a very clear link to economy and growth. So we start seeing that we cannot operate in silos, right? And hence, in some of the energy plants that have been already produced, agriculture is a big sector that has been already in that analysis. So we see this opportunity to the upskilling, reskilling, but also touching on other areas such as finance, such as nature, such as investment, subsidies. So there's a wealth of knowledge that Future Climate Engineering Solutions is providing and offering to engineers that want to engage in this work on climate action.
Thank you, Beatrice. And I mean, talking about agriculture, I mean, in the work we've done on the UK Energy Plan, we even got some input from the Institution of Agricultural Engineers, who are a very diverse group in their own right. I mean, Jonathan, not necessarily specific on agriculture, I know that's not your personal area. I mean, would you like to kind of add anything to this kind of discussion we've had on skills?
Yeah, I think it's important to realise we're going to need reskilling at all levels. So at one level, we need engineers to develop the new technologies, and I know the UK's doing very well in things like battery technology. We've kind of forgotten about nuclear technology in Britain over the years, and we're outsourcing that to other places, and perhaps we should remember how to do that again as a country. I think we developed the world's first nuclear power station that was viable in the UK. And then all the way down to, you were saying, sort of beyond engineering to plumbers and gas fitters who are going to need to retrain as fitting electric heat pumps, for example. You know, the government's ambitions on those are laudable, but you know, the capacity to install such things is you know, will need expanding greatly, and that will need reskilling. So it is at all levels.
Yeah, so we've got apprenticeships and technicians, and then we've got engineers and the professional recognition of that through professional registration, absolutely. So I'm conscious of time. We've covered quite a lot. I think it's been fascinating to look at the Danish example here, and I think one of the things that a professional engineering institution can do, and the network that when institutions work together, for example, like Future Climate Engineering Solutions, is that we can all learn from each other. You know, a solution that might work for in Denmark would not necessarily work in the UK, and it might not necessarily work in Australia or Malaysia. But there are still things we can and should learn from each other. So, you know, to wrap up, I'd like to come to each of you in turn and just, you know, ask you what your take-homes are from the conversation we've had today, and your engineering take on what we've seen so far in Glasgow. So, I mean, Beatrice, if I can come to you briefly first, please.
Yeah, I think in a general takeaway, I think is we don't have more time, and action is critical. And I invite everyone who's participating today in this discussion that if you are an engineer and you are keen to be involved in the climate agenda, you have a very important role to play. So I would encourage to engage and to find a way that we can help governments in achieving their NDCs, because action is critical.
Thank you. And Jonathan, coming back to yourself.
I've been surprised how little engineering there is actually represented at COP26. And I think it's, you know, to solve those big problems, the hard hitters, we're going to need hard engineering. And yeah, I'd like to see engineers better represented at this forum than others.
And yourself, Kurt?
I will take with me the option to bring our solutions forward to the NDCs, because I think that is exactly where we should put them in. We should have our technology and our knowledge integrated into the NDCs in the individual countries, and I'm working in the construction sector together with the Global Building Alliance, and there we are evaluating the NDCs every year, and we publish a report every year, and we point out how many countries have set ambitions in their NDCs on buildings, and what have they done. And we will continue doing that work on the construction sector. But maybe we should also do it here. Maybe we should look into NDCs and see how have individual countries implemented the philosophy that we have presented here today, where we talk about input and output, reduce the output and put in renewable in the input. How many countries have integrated that methodology into their NDCs? And then we maybe should approach those who have not, and approach the engineering associations in those countries. So that's an additional job I would like to hand out to you, to evaluate the NDCs and then see if there's somewhere where we need to integrate with the National Engineering Association.
Certainly sounds like you're sending out a challenge to us then. So if you've got any willing and enthusiastic engineers, then please step forward. So I think for me, I agree. I wasn't sure how much engineering we'd see at this conference, but there's a lot of talk about action. There's been some positive movement on that and make sure action, but when we leave COP26, it's not the end, it is the beginning of yet more delivery of that action, and the delivery cannot come soon enough. So there is a real role for us to play as engineers in delivering that, and engineering institutions and collaborations with those engineering institutions are going to be absolutely central to making sure we do actually achieve what our planet needs. And every engineer can play their part in shaping change from within. We still need people in the oil and gas industry for the moment. It will obviously gradually decrease, but we still need those skills, and their skills have to be changed. And there is always an opportunity for the right ethical approach and the right approach in terms of improving the processes we have. So I think with that, I will wrap up this conversation. Thank you very much, Beatrice, for joining us from Geneva. Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Kurt, and thank you everyone online, and for those of us who are joining us here in Glasgow. Thank you.